Hi, I'm Karen Alari, and this is a reference photo that I'm going to be using for my painting today. I'm going to be calling the painting Summer Pond, which you might think is kind of interesting because there's no pond in this picture. But that's one of the things I'm going to be changing and why I wanted to show you this reference photo first. Back here is a dry area that I'm actually going to be expanding and turning into a little pond. I think it has water in there in the winter, but this was taken in late summer and it had all dried up. I'll also be removing this tree from our painting in the end. And besides that, I'll just take these grassy, weedy area and make it look a little more natural, expand these yellow wildflowers that I really like into the foreground a little bit, and I think that will make it very interesting. This tree will be our focal point, and but the beautiful colors between the blue sky and the green of the grasses, I think will make us a really beautiful painting today. So let's get started. We're painting in acrylic paints today, and this should be a lot of fun. We're going to start out a little differently than I normally do. Usually I would do what's called a block in and put the large, simple shapes in the painting down first. This time I'm going to tone the whole canvas in the same color. Um, It's just a light blue color, which is kind of the color of the sky and the pond. And I'm just using that as a way to cover the white of the canvas, so if any of it shows through, it won't matter. You won't get those little white sparkles of canvas in there. So the other thing I'm doing differently this time, and I say differently because I've done a number of these videos for my teaching website. It's called paintwithkarenalari.com, and there's quite a few videos on there for you to check out and learn all kinds of different aspects of painting with acrylic paints. I really love to paint with acrylics. They're very versatile and very forgiving, and I just think it's a great medium whether you're a beginner and just never picked up a paintbrush before, or you've been painting for a long time. They clean up easily with water with no toxic smell, so you can have the paint right in your room or on your kitchen table. So what I've done here is I've started by laying in my distant mountains, and as I was looking more closely at my reference photo, I realized that there was a little bit of Mount Hood showing in the background there, which was just a really cool aspect that I hadn't really noticed until I looked more closely at the reference photo I'd taken. So I dropped in a really pale Mount Hood in the background there, and then some very blue distant mountains. And my reference photo had those mountains, but they were a very thin line, and I wanted to exaggerate that and just have more depth of blue mountains showing. I think that really pretty blue color will set off nicely against the green of the grasses and the trees and make for a really nice contrast. One important thing to remember when you're painting a sky is that it's always going to get lighter towards the horizon. And you also want to think in your mind, where is the brighter part of the sky? And where I'm putting the light paint right now, the sun is going to be coming more from that direction. It's getting later in the afternoon. The light will be coming from the left and giving us some pretty long shadows going to the right. So it's always important to, right from the beginning, establish where your light source is going to be and then make sure you stick to that throughout the painting. You can see I've come back with some blue and done some negative painting. In other words, painting the background. I'm painting some blue sky back in around those wispy clouds that are in the sky. So you've got, in painting skies, a few things to think about. First of all, you want them to be soft, soft, soft. And in acrylic paint, of course, you don't have too much time to work the paint, so you have to come back in quickly after you've laid down your paint in order to soften it out. What I've done is put in some fairly thick paint with my brush. I rinse off my brush and dry it off a little bit, and then I come back in with a scrubbing motion to soften those bottom edges. Edges are so important in painting, and they can really define the give you a feeling of reality in your paintings. You have to watch those edges. Some are going to be crisp and some of them are going to be soft, and in order to know which is which, you need to really look at your reference photo, or if you're outdoors painting in life or painting a still life from life, you need to really look at what you're seeing. Don't assume the edge is sharp, but look at it and decide, is that a sharp edge, or does it just kind of fade off and you don't even notice it's there? So here I've come in with some almost a very peachy color, because as the cloud is being hit by that sunlight that's a little bit low in the sky, it's much warmer than the undersides, the dark sides of the clouds, the shadowed sides of the clouds. So I put a little bit of that orange in there, and then I came back in and blended it with the white and the blues that were on the canvas, so it wouldn't be really strongly orange. It would just give me a hint of orange blush to those clouds right there. I'm also thinking about the placement of the clouds. You know, with clouds you have so much ability to change up what's in your photo or what you're seeing in life, and use the lines of the clouds and the shapes of the clouds as part of your composition. The clouds can mimic some of your shapes on the ground, or they can create lines and directional pointers that point your eye to the focal point in your painting. And that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about where am I putting these highlighted sides of the clouds. There's going to be kind of a line that's created from the top of the painting, the top right, and it comes down and over towards the left where my focal point tree is going to be. It's going to help the eye stay right into the center of that painting. As I make these videos, the color on them isn't very accurate to life. They're quite a bit bluer than reality, so that's a little bit frustrating in making these, but just for you to keep that in mind. And you'll see when we get to the end product what the differences are, but you can still see the relative colors in what we're working with. You can see I came back in with some more of that blue sky and pulled it back down around the tops of the clouds. So I've got my clouds in there, and now I'm coming in with a slightly darker color of blue mountains. Remember, as you do your painting, the things that are the farthest away are going to be the lightest and the bluest, have the least amount of red and yellow and orange in them. And as things come forward, they get warmer and they get darker. So that has to do with the atmosphere and the water that's in the air that stacks up when you look into the distance and you're looking through that atmosphere. That's why they call it atmospheric perspective. But that's what really gives your painting depth, is really nailing those values. And values are the relative lightness and darkness in any particular area in your painting. So I say this often, but we often think it's color that, or shape or drawing, that makes a painting look realistic. And in reality, the biggest thing that makes your painting look realistic is getting them accurate values. So we spend a lot of time on that. I spend a lot of time in trying to teach you that to get those values accurate from the beginning. And in acrylic paints, you have to remember that they're going to dry a little bit darker than you put them on the canvas. But the good thing about that is you can come right back over like I just did. As that row of mountains was starting to dry, I could see it was darkening too far. So I just came back in while it was still damp with some white and lightened it up and blended those colors together. This is my standard palette. I'm using a Masterson Stay Wet palette. There's a couple of layers of paper towels that I get wet with a spray bottle, and then I put an acrylic palette paper down over the top of that. And that keeps the acrylic paint wet throughout the painting process, and once I seal it up at night, it keeps it wet for a very long time, longer than it takes me to use the paint up. So they're a really wonderful thing to have if you try to put your acrylic paints just straight on a normal palette without any kind of moisture under them. You will probably get frustrated because they will dry really quickly. So that's something you might want to invest in, or really any type of plastic container that has a sealable lid on it would do just fine. So now that I got my little blue mountains in the background, I'm starting to work on the values of these mid-range trees. I'm thinking about color, but I'm also thinking about what value are they going to be, how much darker are they going to be than the background mountains, and how much greener. So I'm just drawing in the big basic shapes. As you can see, I'm making my standard dark color that I like to use a lot. It's made with Pthalo Blue, Alizarin Crimson, and Quinacridone Gold, and it makes a very nice transparent dark color that you can move in a little redder, as I did just there, or bluer, depending on what you need. And then you can just add white to that to get your varieties of gray. And as you can see, I've come in and I've got the big basic shapes of those mid-ground trees, and now I'm laying in the dark. And then I will come back over that with a brighter green. Generally, the progression when you're painting in acrylics, you're going to lay down your shadow color first, and then you come back on top of that with your mid value, and then your lights and your highlights. So, and you can do that because the acrylic paint dries in between. If you're working with watercolors, you have to worry about them mixing and muddying up with the layers underneath. And if you're working with oils, you also have to worry about them mixing and becoming mush and losing the freshness of your brushstroke, which is another the reasons I love acrylic painting so much, because within a minute that paint I put down is dry, and I can come back over the top of it with a fresh layer and a fresh brush stroke, and it looks fresh still. It doesn't have to mix. And if you want it to mix with the layers below, you just come back in sooner, and you can use a little water to moisten them up again if they've started to dry out a little bit. We're mixing greens here. I only have 2 blues on my palette. I use Ultramarine Blue and Pthalo Blue, and then I use Cadmium Yellow, medium, and then I use a Quinacridone Gold, which is basically a dark yellow color. And between those 4 colors and white, I can pretty much mix the greens that I want. Pthalo Blue is a very bright, intense, clear blue color, so you just use a very, very small amount of it. A little bit goes a long way. Ultramarine Blue is a warmer blue. It's more opaque, has more of a covering ability, and is a very brilliant gem-like color in itself. Cadmium Yellow is just a very bright, vivid yellow, and our Quinacridone Gold adds a real it's a nature color. I like to think of it. It's a clear color, but it adds a lot of that warmth that you see in the greens in nature. Very seldom do you see a really bright blue green in nature. You more often see these yellowed greens. So as you can see, as I paint on my palette, I have different piles in different locations on the palette, and I just add color to them to push the color of that pile the direction I want it to go. If I need it a little bluer, I add more blue, lighter, add more white, And if I need to start with a very fresh color, I'll move to a clean spot on my palette and go from there. Then you can move into the grays. And how do I make those grays, you might ask? Well, the best way to mix a gray when you're painting is to use the complementary color. So if I've got some green on my palette, the complementary color, or the color that's opposite on the color wheel to that, is going to be red. So I'm just going to add a little bit of one of my reds to that green, and that will gray it down. As you can see, I often come back as I'm painting, clean off my brush, dip it in water a little bit, and then blend out these edges, especially in the background. Your eye can't see a clear image that far back in your painting, so you need to soften those edges, and you can always come back over them if you've let them dry and try another layer, which is why acrylic paints are so forgiving and wonderful to work with. But the easiest way is just to clean off your brush, dry it off till it's damp, and then just scrub the edge that you want to be soft, and it'll soften it right up. That's my Alizarin Crimson I'm using, some Ultramarine Blue. Put it on top of that grayed color that was on my palette to get sort of a grayed purpley color. Laying in the darks again of these background trees. I always lay the darks in and then come back in with the lighter colors over the top, and then you can always come back in on top of that and put some darks back in once more. There's a real kind of give and take with acrylic painting. You paint in some of the foreground and then the background around it. There's endless possibilities in what you can do. You never have to get stressed or worried that you've ruined it. You just take a minute, step back, let that layer dry, and you can put another layer right over the top of it with no harm done. So that's why I really enjoy working with them. I'm working with a small round bristle brush. I don't use real expensive bristle brushes because I like it when they get a little bit roughed up. They make better foliage when they're don't have a real clean, strong point on them. But I use oftentimes the side of my brush, as you can see, and I hold the paintbrush very lightly in my hand, and I'm just tapping and brushing and to create these sort of soft, natural shapes and forms and moving my hand. I have my reference photo as I'm working up on my video monitor next to me, and I find that's a really good way. You can also, of course, use a reference photo that's printed out. I just find it easier to work with it straight on the video monitor. And as I'm working, I also have a full-length mirror leaning up against the wall behind me, and it's angled in a way that I can just turn around and look over my shoulder and see my painting as it progresses in the mirror. If you have a nice large studio, if you're working outdoors, you can step back 5 or 6 feet from your painting and get the same effect, but you want to be able to get some distance on it, squint at it, get that distance, and don't always just keep your nose right up on the painting, or you'll step back and see something that was a big thing you couldn't even see because you were so close to it. So look often in your mirror, glance often at your reference photo, and what I do is I just focus on trying to turn off my mind in a certain way. Don't think about it, just see it. Don't say, oh, okay, now I have to do the hard part. It's a tree, or it's water or something. You're just looking at shapes of color. Nothing more. When you break it down and you think about it, if you see a certain color in your reference photo and it's a certain shape, then you just put that into your painting. So and all the time knowing that it's a trial and error process, and as you put it down and you look at it, if that wasn't quite right, well, mix it up a little. Did it need to be bluer, greener, lighter, redder? What did it need? And just adjust your color a little bit and try again. It's a really fun process, and nothing to be stressed about or worried about. You can just enjoy the painting, and that's what I really love to do. This whole process of doing this painting is going to be in 3 parts. This is the first of 3 parts, and we're going to go through all the steps from the very beginning to the very end, and you'll be able to watch this painting unfold before you. So you can see I brought back in some more darks, and now I'm going to a mid-range color for these trees. You'll always have your shadow colors. You'll have some in between the shadow and the light. You're going to have some really bright, vivid or chromatic color, and then you'll have color that's in between, but you just want to be sure and think about maintaining the shadow and the light, and which side is that going to be on. Remember, I have my light source coming from the left hand side, so the right hand side of these trees are going to be shadowed, and I'm just looking at that reference photo and squinting my eyes and placing that shape of the color where I see it in this sort of a give and take process, and letting the painting evolve and letting myself explore the shapes as I'm making them, and never feel like you have to keep the shapes exactly as they are in your reference photo. You're creating this so you can adjust them so the shapes are more pleasing, the placement is more pleasing to you, and that's what makes it your painting, and that's what brings your influence to it and expresses who you are in this painting. We're gonna just add some more light now back on the top, and you see how I've created kind of layer on layer on layer, which is such a fun thing to do with these acrylic paints, and to me that creates sort of a softness and a complexity. It's fun to look at from a distance, but when you come up close to the painting, it also has depth and variety and interest for you to look at when you're close up as well. And the interest from afar comes from getting those values right. I'm gonna talk about them a lot, and I talk about it in all my videos because values are so important to getting that realistic feel in your painting, if that's the style of painting you're going for, which I call my style, I guess, a little bit of impressionistic realism. It's not quite realistic. I want it to be obvious it's a painting, but something that you can really step into and feel like you can really feel yourself there, and feel the wind and feel the sun on your face and hear the birds and smell the smells. So we're about done with part 1 of our little painting today, and please do join me for part 2, and join me on my website, paintwithkarenalari.com. Thanks for joining me.